So my name is Sarah Gruntmeir. I started my research at Cornell. Mario gave a good introduction to that. And then I moved to the Hudson Valley of New York to manage an orchard there. And I ended up in Washington State for my master's work. And now I am at KOB, which is at the very southern part of Germany. So we have a really nice view of Lake Constance, and the Swiss Alps are down there too. So it's a really pretty place. If you guys go to Interpoma, we're a couple hours away, so maybe a stop at our research center might be warranted. Today I'm going to present on a couple different topics of thinning practices that you can implement, and the first is with the BMV 800. So I believe they're calling this the Newton thinner. We discovered it at the Interpoma conference in 2022, and really the main goal for this machine was to do the work in collaboration with an organic grower who was looking for more ways to have an alternate practice for hand thinning. So in the secondary thinner stage, there's not a lot of options for organic growers for thinning, so we were lended the machine from this company and we started doing our work with it. We've found that our best results for apples are from 30 to 35 millimeters. We've tried a couple different thinning stages, so earlier and later. We found that earlier the fruits weren't really wanting to come off the tree, and any later it was causing too much damage to the fruitlets. We have done work at KOB on plums and cherries. If you're interested in that, you can come find me later and I'll share our results for that. They are a bit more promising than our apple results, so it worked better for those. The company also advertises that you can use it for apricots and peaches, but we haven't been able to test it on those yet. So the way the machine works, it rotates the entire implement, and then the rods are in groups of 3 and they kind of vibrate up and down. You can mount it to the front or the back of the tractor. We've found the best results in the front because then you can see the thinning effects and see what it's doing to the tree, but you can mount it to the back also. So the settings that you can change for the machinery, you can change the vibration of the rods, the speed that they're going in. You can also change the speed that it's rotating, and then you can of course change the speed the tractor is running in. We'll go to the next slide. This is a video of it working in our orchard at KOB, and the rods are vibrating. And I will pass this around so you guys can kind of see it. This is actually the rod from the machine that I lugged with me from Germany. Here's this. So we've done this across 3 years, and the way that we figured out the settings to use in the orchard is by driving through test rows to figure out the speeds that would be best for the canopy and the variety that we're using. So the first year we were thinning on an organic topaz orchard. This was with the grower that we collaborated with. The first year we were thinning later than what we wanted to. It was on the 18th of July, so we would have rather gone in and thinned earlier, but we didn't have the machine in time for this. So the first machine settings were 430 vibrations of the rod, 12 RPMs around, 2.2 speed, and that is what the company advertised. However, the farmer thought that the vibrations were a little bit too fast, and the revolutions weren't fast enough, and he also wanted to drive the tractor faster. So we tested the recommended speed by the company and then what the farmer preferred. And we also compared this to the untreated control, so this received no thinning at all. The machine didn't thin it, there was no hand thinning. This is just what the tree did naturally. This is the orchard that we used, and it was thinned at 48 millimeters. Again, we would have preferred a bit earlier. So for the fruitlets that fell off the tree, this is the fruits that were on the ground that were knocked off by the machine. We did find that the settings caused different size fruitlets to fall off the tree. So with the farmer recommended settings, it did thin smaller fruits off the tree, which left larger ones. And then the first machine settings thinned about an average size of the fruitlets from the tree. For the overall crop load, there was no difference before the machine thinning. The farmer would have preferred at the end at harvest for the ideal crop load to be at 100. So you'll notice we never really got there with the machine in this year. So overall, the crop load probably should have been a bit lower at harvest. There were differences, though, in between these settings for the machine too. So this is what the farmer liked. It dropped 59 fruit from before we thinned to at harvest. So this was a pretty large amount when compared to the control, which only dropped 12 fruit. At harvest, there was no significant difference in diameter. I'm going to go ahead and say there never was across any year that we did this study. But for the amount of Class 1 fruit, the top pack out at harvest, there were significantly more Class 1 fruit with the machine 2 settings, which was the farmer preference. So we were able to increase the amount of Class 1 fruit, but you'll notice the amount of Class 1 fruit was 33%, which is quite low. So overall, I think that the crop load did play into that. So if we were able to get the numbers of fruitlet on the tree during the thinning stage down, it would have helped with that, but 33 is quite a low amount of pack out. The second year, we weren't able to go in and thin on the same orchard, unfortunately, because it had a low amount of fruit set. So we had to switch to a Braeburn orchard at KOB, and we thinned at the 16th of June. For the Braeburn, we found that we needed different settings compared to the first year, so we changed it up a little bit. The vibrations are quite faster than the first year. They were all treated with 6BA in this year, so the crop load was a bit lower when we went in and thinned, and we did not hand thin after the machine went into the orchard. We had to replace some of the rods because they got damaged during the first year. And again, like I mentioned, we changed the settings to fit Braeburn appropriately. We thinned at 33 millimeters this year, and this was the orchard at KOB that we used. For the fruitlets that we found that abscised off of the tree, there were no difference this year compared for the setting. So they both thinned about the same size fruit, but they did thin the smaller fruitlets off the tree, which would have left the larger fruitlets. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the crop load to be even before we went in and thinned. We had a lack of resources, but it was similar between the machine settings, so we can compare that. Unfortunately, there weren't any differences even compared to the control, but the machine 2 settings were quite high. It had 171 fruit before thinning, and after thinning it had 140. So we did drop 31 fruit, so that could have been a reduction in the amount of hand thinning that would have been required in this orchard. At harvest, there weren't any differences, any large differences in the amount of Class 1 fruit. We did have a bit of a difference. For the control, we had about 87% of Class 1 fruit compared to the highest was about 89. So a slight increase, but nothing too large. I think that this could have been attributed, the higher amount of Class 1 fruit, to the fact that we thinned earlier in the season with the 6BA. So this did help bump up our numbers. And that is about normal for the pack out that we're receiving in the area. The third year, again, unfortunately, we had to switch up the orchard. We didn't have enough fruit set in the Braeburn or the Topaz orchards, so we tried it on another variety this year. We did increase the vibrations again a lot, so it was at 500, and then we changed the revolution and the speed. We, again, had to mount new rods for the third year. This was the orchard that we used. We thinned at about 31 millimeters on average. We did try earlier and it wasn't thinning the fruitlets. I do think it would be interesting to see in the test rows if we had any delayed fruit drop, but we weren't seeing it come off the tree immediately, so we had to wait until about 31 millimeters. The machine settings in this year did cause different size fruitlets to abscise off of the tree. So with the slower revolution and the slower tractor speed, I think that the thinner was spending more time impacting and hitting each fruit. So I think that this is the reason why the slower revolution and speed were thinning the smallest fruitlets off the tree. At harvest, though, there was no difference when you're comparing to the control, but it is important to note that the machine 2 dropped 257 fruit per tree on average, which would have been a big difference if you were hand thinning. That is a pretty big number of fruitlets to not have to hand thin. There were not any huge differences in the amount of class 1 fruit, but for the machine settings, we were at about 50% of class 1 fruit compared to 37 with a control. So as a grower, that would probably bring economic differences for you. I think this is what we were all waiting for. What does the damage the machine do to the fruit? So with our results at KOB, we didn't find a lot of damage. In the first year with the Topaz orchard, it was about 7% of damage to the overall crop load. And then in Braeburn, it was only about 3.5% for each fruitlet. And then for each tree, sorry. We didn't observe any damage in the last year with the Panova orchard. However, we did do this in conjunction with the Limburg Research Institute, who is in Italy, and they had quite a bit more damage than what we saw. So in 2024, they did a research trial on Gala and Joya, and they saw for the Gala orchard almost 20% damage of the overall crop, and this is hard damage. So it's not just to the fruit skin, it's to the internal fruitlet itself. And then they saw quite a large amount of damage to the Joya variety. That was almost 50%. So that's quite a lot, and it's not good at all. I see you shaking your head, and I agree. So this is kind of variety and canopy dependent. So you'll see, it's kind of hard to notice in this picture, but there's kind of a horizontal mark on this apple here. And from our trial, we think that that is from the rod actually hitting the apple itself. But it also can cause damage when the fruitlets hit each other. So there's some circular bruises on the apples here, and we think that that is from the fruitlets knocking into each other. So there's two types of damage that the machine can do to the fruitlets itself, but it can also damage the trees. So the machine is knocking off entire fruiting spurs. It can damage the branches also. So it did knock some branches off, and then Limburg, you saw that they had quite a bit of damage to their fruitlets, but they also saw a lot of entire spurs being knocked off. So it did vary a little bit, and you'll have to think of if this is something that you want based on the varieties that you're growing and the canopy systems that you're using. So overall, the goal is to reduce the crop load early in the season. This will help with the overall carbohydrate balance of the trees, so we really want to remove the fruitlets as early as possible. It does cause damage, but hand thinning is very expensive, so this could be an alternative, especially for organic growers who don't have a lot of secondary thinner options. But I mean, even with the small results, a reduction of the crop load is a big deal to focus on early in the season, so I think that that's something important. And we hope to do more results in the future. Hopefully we can go back in one of the previous orchards that we've used and see the damage compared year to year. My second topic that I'm going to talk about is how to predict the fruitlets that will fall off with chemical thinners or naturally on the tree. So this is kind of the future, looking forward maybe 5 years. We really hope to implement light-based sensors that will be able to predict the internal properties of the fruitlets so that we can see which ones are likely to stay on the tree or which ones are destined to fall off no matter what, or with the use of chemical applications. We can start our prediction models at about 8 millimeters and then continue on throughout the season. And we've also done this in conjunction with Limeberg, and we have multiple years of data across thousands of fruitlets. The orchard that I used was at KOB for this, and we are testing it on Gala and Braeburn. And I've gone in and marked the fruitlets so that I can follow up with them and see how they're changing across the entire season. This is the abscission rate that I have found in the trials. You'll notice that the overall crop load kind of evened out even with the 6BA and ATS treatments, but the 6BA treatment did thin the fruitlets earlier in the season. We weren't able to analyze the fruitlets at harvest, but I think if we would be able to, we would notice larger and more colorful fruit because this thinner hit the fruit during the cell division stage, so the carbohydrates would have been able to redistribute to the persisting fruit earlier in the season. You might be thinking about all of this and thinking that it's too far in the future. What can you do now? And what we've found is that fruit diameter can be a very important metric. So especially with the easier to thin varieties like Braeburn, following diameter can give you a lot of information throughout the season, especially before what I call June drop. It would be December drop for you. So what I found with the Braeburn fruitlets is that the abscising fruit were consistently in the bottom 1/3 of the diameter. So those were the fruitlets that were going to abscise off of the tree. So just with diameter alone, I've been able to predict it to about 83%, which isn't completely 100%. We would like it to be higher, but diameter is a very important thing to think of, especially with the easier to thin varieties. It will change. Gala diameter is a little bit less predictable, but we still have been able to predict abscission with diameter in harder to thin varieties. So we've used 3 devices. You might be familiar with the Felix device. This is mainly used for pre-harvest maturity, but we have found applications for fruit abscission. So before we had prototypes, this is what we've been using. Its ideal purpose isn't abscission, but it can be helpful. We've built 2 new prototypes to build off of this information. The first is the Astra device, and it measures the light that's going from one side of the apple completely through it and to the other side. This also has an integrated diameter measurement, so it's just as fast as taking the diameter measurements in the orchard, and it can also give you that information. And then the third device that we've been using is the Sarissa device. It's kind of similar to the Felix device. We hope to be able to use this for things like internal browning, irrigation status, so like the water content of the fruitlet itself, harvest maturity, and then while I'm in Australia, I'm going to do a couple measurements at the green fruit stage to see if we can also use it for thinning, but we have used these both at KOB for 1 year, so in the future we'll get a lot more information. These sensors are giving information kind of like this. It comes from the Felix device, but you can see even at about 12 millimeters, the abscising fruitlets definitely have different qualities inside of them than the persisting fruit. So at about 970 nanometers is the water range, the water peak. So this shows the differences. The abscising fruit are showing different qualities than the persisting fruit, which are here. And also from this information, we can get chlorophyll content here, and we can also gain information on the anthocyanin content of the fruitlet itself. So with the model that we've built from the Felix device, keep in mind this is not its intended purpose, but even with the older device, we've been able to improve our models by about 13%. So these new devices are giving us a lot of information in the orchard on what the internal properties are of the fruitlet itself. So we hope in the future we'll be able to use these a lot more. I will note the Felix device is about $10,000 US, which is kind of out of range for most growers, but we're really hoping that when we patent the new devices and get them running, we can get this cost a lot lower, since it will be from a non-for-profit research institute and not a company like the Felix device. So overall, you can gain a lot of information if you follow the fruitlet diameter early in the season, especially for the early or from the easy thinning varieties. But we're hoping that in the future, these light sensors will gain a lot more information. And I really think that this is kind of the future of predicting fruit drop, is these light sensors. We've only used these for 1 year, but we're really happy with the results. These devices were pretty easy to use. And we think that we'll be able to make a model in the future that you guys can just plug in the data from. We've also analyzed the internal properties of the fruitlets, so sugar and acid contents, and we've based the models to see what changes are happening with the actual fruitlet sugars and acids itself. So that was my presentation. This is what KOB looks like in Germany. If you guys ever can visit, we would like to have you. My email is there. You can send me emails if you have any questions on the presentation. And we also post a lot of research updates to our Instagram. If you're interested in following us, you can see what we're doing more. So, yeah.